first important thing about your process is recognizing that it's yours, that there is not a right or wrong way. Some people write at night, some people write in the day, some people write in short bursts, some people write in long extended bursts. There's no particular better or worse process. The important thing about a process is it's something that you can do relatively easily. For whatever reason, it works for you. And that means you have to spend time paying attention to yourself, trying different things and seeing which ones work and which ones don't work, and being really honest about that.
I will say one thing that I think could be very interesting to people that are writers is what I do is I outline a script very meticulously, and my outlines are about 25 pages to 30 pages long. And then when I go to write the actual first draft, I will not reread one word of what I've written until I've written the whole script. So for my first pass on a screenplay, I start from the beginning and then I just go. And I go all the way through until I'm done without having read one word of it. And it takes about 3 weeks. So in 3 weeks, I've written a whole draft, and it's a lot of fun because there is no judgment whatsoever. I'm just writing straight through. And then I go through and very meticulously work through the scenes. And that takes 2 to 3 weeks. And then in 6 weeks, I have a draft, but it's really 2 drafts because I've done one straight through and then one this sort of meticulous work through. And I will say that the second phase of it, the meticulous work through phase, is the least enjoyable part of the whole process because it's the most critical, where I just, for a couple weeks, it's just I have to work through these scenes and then, but I just do it. And then after that, I have a draft to work off of, and then there's many drafts after that, but I have this nice foundation.
I start with somewhat of an outline. I need to know where I am and then where I'm going or where I just came from. So usually for me personally, when I'm starting to write, it's not coming from a starting place. It's coming from a scene I already had. So I write that scene out. The most vivid thing about what I think about this idea, I write that scene out without it doesn't have to fit anywhere. I don't know where this is, but I just see these characters doing this at some point. So I start there, kind of get my groove going and start to, I really feel this moment. I've seen this moment. I'm a very visual writer, and when ideas come to me, they come to me almost as like a movie. So I'm able to write that down, and then now I go to an outline because I don't even know where this is. So I know I'm here, but I don't know where this is in the story or anything like that. So I just start with, okay, where's it ending? Where are we going? And then go from there. So I kind of, in a very non-linear way, bounce about the outline. And then in the end, which the outline could take 2 months, in the end I see it and I'm like, okay, now this is some type of map with the understanding that we can deviate from it.
It's just throwing ideas around at first. And Chris Bergosh, who co-wrote Starlet and Tangerine, he's wonderful at, note-taking. So he's there typing away, just compiling every note possible into something. I don't even know what he's typing, simple text or something. He's just compiling all these notes. So the first day is really just us brainstorming, spitballing ideas. That's really hard to say because it's over the course of many months, so I think there's a point where there are enough notes down on page and you understand your story enough where it's time to start writing those pages. So I might write a page, he'll write a page, we'll start sharing them. I know that we used for both films, I think we used Google Drive, and we were sharing a lot that way. We also go about it where we eventually get to a point where we have the Post-its on the wall, and that's when you actually can get a film or your idea or your script up on the wall and with hundreds of Post-its, and it makes sense from beginning to end. I think that's when we decide to start assigning each other pages and scenes. So we'll say, okay, look at that scene. I think I got a handle on that scene. I'll take that. Can you take that one? Because I don't have a handle on that one. And then we share them, and then we start to compile this thing, and that's how that's done. Mm-hmm. I almost always know the endings of every one of these movies before we even set down the road to, to start breaking it out point by point. I mean, I knew the ending of Starlet, I knew the ending of Tangerine, I know the ending of the next film. So that's because I think endings are very important to me. Same goes for Prince of Broadway and Takeout. So with all of them, I knew the ending was almost more important than the beginning. This is the first time I'm thinking about this sort of stuff. So I haven't been asked these questions before. So, but yeah, no, I think it's actually, I focus more on the last scene and the impact the last scene will have. That's almost one of the first things I think about. With Tangerine, it was the only thing we thought about. When I went to, to start our research process, Chris Bergash and I went to the corner of Santa Monica and Highland, and we started introducing ourselves to people, etc. Just telling them what we were going to do. When we finally found Maya and Kiki, I said, I only have like a few ideas here, and one of them is, well, first off, it has to take place on one day, because we have a limited budget and costume changes cost money and continuity costs money. It's easier to shoot in a film that takes place in a 24-hour period of time. The second one is that I think people are coming together, or someone's trying to find somebody else, or whether that's a love story or a revenge story, I don't know. And the third is this ending. I know I can see the ending. I can see all my characters converging at the end at donut time in a big climactic scene. Those were the only things I saw going into it. So it's funny, yeah, it's funny you say, it's funny you bring that up. The endings are very important to me because it's about how the audience leaves the theaters, I think very much so about the impact of that last scene. If you think, I look at my favorite films, and my favorite films are like Harold and Maude, and when he's walking away at the end after, the car goes over the cliff and you think he might be in it, but then he's up on the cliff and he's with his banjo. You have, most of my favorite films have such incredibly memorable, lasting scenes that have an impact on the audience as they're sitting there during the final credits. And I think that that's something I'm always conscious of. It's the most important thing for me in a screenplay.
When I went to work with Michael McDowell on Beetlejuice, we had been working for a couple of weeks, and he sat down with me and he said, Larry, this is not working out. This is not happening. And I was taken aback, and I said, why? What do you mean? He said, because you're just sitting around waiting for inspiration. And I don't work like that. I'm not going to sit around waiting for you to be inspired. If you're going to work with me, and Michael was as professional writer as I had ever met. He had published, I don't know, 19, 20 novels, horror novels, great genre novels. He had written for a show called Tales from the Dark Side. He was the real deal, and not a not a person to hold back his feelings, okay. And again, he said to me, "This is just not happening." And he said, and this changed my life as a writer. He said, "If you're going to work with me, look at it like we're working in a bank. We get in at 9, we have a cup of coffee, we say good morning, then we go to work, and we write until lunch. We go have our lunch. We come back, we write again until around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We fold up the writing, we return whatever phone calls, whatever business of writing we have to do. And we do this 5-6 days a week. And and it's a job. It's not you sitting with a metaphorical beret in a metaphorical loft waiting for inspiration to strike. It's a job. And it was a bit of tough love, and it took me aback, and I was, I suppose, a tiny bit offended. But then the thing he said to me that sealed the deal, because when I was working at Paramount, I was writing script notes. Again, it was like a 16-hour day often, and probably 14 of those hours a day was writing script notes. And he said, Larry, you've told me you've written hundreds of pages of notes for other people's scripts. Why can't you do it for yourself? And I was like, wow, okay, I will try it your way. And it changed my perception of who a writer is, what a writer does, and it changed my work habits, and it changed everything. And I did it his way, and I took all of that, and he was absolutely right. All of that discipline that I'd put into other people's work, I started putting into my work, our work. And it was, and Beetlejuice came out of that. And as crazy and, and as far out as that movie is, the script was written in a very disciplined way, because that was the way Michael needed to work.
The process is super complex, and it's evolved over a long period of time of how to write stuff. I definitely agree with Ty that a big part of screenwriting is forcing yourself to just create and to not analyze and to not put it into an intellectual space. I mean, my brother even talks into a dictaphone, but honestly, I think the best piece of advice and the toughest part about writing something, in my opinion, is the first draft. And I call it the vomit draft, where you just literally puke up. In my opinion, the best thing you can do for yourself is just to write a terrible first draft. That's got to be your mindset. It's like, what I'm about to write is going to be horrible, but it's going to allow me to have a platform to redo scenes, to build it up, to give it to my friends, let them read it, tell me how to make it better. You have to create the foundation, and it's all about getting it out of your head and onto a piece of paper, because once it's on a piece of paper, now you have something that exists in the world that you can share with other people. It's a theme that I've been talking about a lot, is like really getting out of your head and making the process, getting into the world. I don't allow myself to go back when I'm writing something. I just force myself to go all in a row. I don't necessarily go away to do it, but when I do write, I try to get it out as fast as possible, and I don't look back. It's so tempting to do it, but if you do that, you'll start rewriting and you'll start reanalyzing where you're going. I think it's super important just to keep going and to finish it, and then you can start thinking about it and analyzing it. People just get bored. I get bored of ideas all the time, and that's a tricky point to realize. Like, a lot of people have a lot of ideas spinning in their head, and I think I've only recently come to really value my own time and like what I'm going to spend time on. It's such a critical decision which idea you're going to execute. And I think it's also important not to let ideas sit too long. If they sit too long, you're probably going to get bored, and you're probably going to have churned it enough to where you don't need to explore it in screenplay form or in filmmaking form.
What I usually think of when I'm writing, most times I come up with a character, but I know I have to figure out what is the character's issue. And then I stop and think, well, if he's got this issue, how is he going to deal with that issue? And that's when I start to write the 7 points, because I think that comes before writing almost anything else. I usually write the very short bios of the characters that I have in mind, only 3 or 4 sentences, the physiology, the psychology, the sociology of the character. But then I figure out, well, what is the character doing now? What's the character's flaw? Because that's the most important driving point of the character. What is the character's flaw? What is he going to have to do to overcome that flaw? Why does he have to overcome that flaw to achieve his or her goal? So I figure out what is the character's ordinary life. And I just write that in 1 or 2 sentences. Then I figure out, well, what's going to make him change? What's going to happen from the outside that's going to make him change? And then I write that point. And then I figure out, well, what's he going to do about that? And that's the goal and the plan. And then I figure out, well, what's going to make him turn around at the midpoint to realize what's really going on, what he really needs to do. And so I write 1 or 2 sentences about that. And then I figure out, well, how does he screw up? And how does that bring him down and make a low point for him? And then I figure out, how does he bring himself back up and face the final challenge? And I write a couple of sentences about that, what that final challenge might look like. And then I figure out, well, how's it going to be after that? What's his life going to be as a normal person again? Or is now changed forever normal life? And then the process follows after that. Then I generally like, if I haven't already written bios for everybody, I do usually a full-page bio for each central character. That would be the protagonist. The antagonist also deserves a bio, and the central emotional relationship, and anybody else that is important, maybe a catalyst of some sort. I write those bios, then I write a beat sheet. And I stop and figure out, with the 7 points in mind, what are the beats that lead from each point to the next point.
So my process is probably a little different than most people. I write 15 pages a day. Wow. So basically I figure out when it's due, and I back out 15 pages per day, and I take into consideration if I've got something going on in the afternoon. Like today is not a 15-page day because I'm with you guys.
Thank you.
But then I work until those 15 pages are done. So if I'm done at 3 o'clock because I had a great writing day and it went really smoothly, fantastic. If it takes me till 9 o'clock, it takes me till 9 o'clock, and then that's when I end my day. It helps me to do that because I keep on track, and I also don't get caught up in my own, oh my gosh, I'm loving this, I just want to keep going, because that can happen too. When you're really on a roll writing, I've had that happen where you just don't eat and you just keep working through the night and you're just so excited about what you're writing. That's fine, but you can't make a living that way, right? I have relationships and I have people and dinner to make and things like that. And so I stop this is my way of doing it. I stop at 15 pages and that's it, and pick back up tomorrow and start again. I know that seems very technical, right, for something that's so creative. But again, like I said before, you have to look at this like a business, right? So you have to plan and organize and figure out what's giving you the best results. And for me, this gave me the best results because I know at page 11, I only have a few more pages to do and I can be done. And so, and at the beginning of every day, I start out and I go, okay, that's enough. It's a big enough chunk that I'm not forcing myself to go back and reread. That's a deadly thing that writers do, is they go back and they rewrite themselves over and over. So it forces you to keep moving through, and then you do your rewrite at the end. And I build in usually a couple days off because you need that time away from it to kind of forget about it a little bit. And then when I come back and I reread it, I give myself 2 or 3 days to do the rewrite, and it's just basically cleaning everything up or changing act breaks, or if I've come up with an idea in between that time to add, then I'll do that. And I think also, you can get obsessed with, is the writing good? Is it not good? Do I like this? Do I not like it? When you have to get those 15 pages done, eventually you have to say, screw it, I've got to move on. And it forces you to move on, which I think is good for the process, because nothing really good comes from sitting there obsessing over the same scene. So it is what it is. I moved on, I can come back to it. And giving yourself permission to do that, I think, is very healthy. And I think it's actually good for the process and the product.
Well, it depends on which script, it depends on where the story is coming from. Generally speaking, I don't have a backstory beyond a sentence or two. Okay, I don't know what they were like in 6th grade or anything like that. I just kind of take from people in real life, or combine people in real life, or think of people I know. And I just bounce these characters off each other, knowing that this one is, sort of feisty, and this one is sort of mellow, and this one is sort of this, and then you can add on the second and the third adjective sort of as you go. But I think in the beginning, if I'm going to introduce a character that I've never written in my life, I say, Joe, 25, persistent. I don't know, I'll say 2 adjectives and then I'll just move forward. That's it. It's real quick. And then I don't necessarily have to deliver on those adjectives if I feel like it's going in another direction. Maybe he's not persistent. maybe he's lackluster. Maybe he's lazy. I don't know. I have to write him out a little bit. I have to let him talk in order to know. But the dynamic between characters is important, and the chemistry. So I always start there. That's where I start. And the story and the concept I have as like, you know, a sentence. It's just it's not an outline. It's not that's not detailed or in depth. The first draft will be detailed to the absolute, to the extent it needs to be in order to be concise, to the point, and not dragging anywhere where we don't need to be, in particularly in the action. So we enter this room. Am I going to tell you that it's got blue walls and a couch? No, because the characters are what are important, and the room is for the director. That's not my job. I'm the screenwriter. The room is for the director to decide, and if you're the director and the screenwriter, great, or whatever, but you know, people respond to characters first and foremost. And so that's just really the most detailed part of my screenplays. The action, I would say, is the briefest part of my scripts.
I think if you want to write a screenplay, you should take the path of least resistance. So start the screenplay however feels easiest and most fun to you, right? If you don't know where to start, I think a good place to start is with just a brain dump. So I think sitting down with, whether it's, you know, notebook and pen or on your laptop or whatever, and just writing down everything you know about the story. And it doesn't even have to be stuff that you know that happens in the story. It can be things that you like about this type of movie. So I love horror movies because they scare the pants off of me and they make me grab my boyfriend's arm or whatever it is. You can write all of that stuff down. That's all part of like what you're going to try to get into your project, right? So everything that inspires you about it, maybe why you want to write it, maybe the last movie you saw that felt sort of like you would like your movie to feel, movies that inspire you. And then also in that same document, I would also try to put everything that you do know about the story. So the idea that I have is about this guy, and this is his backstory, and these are his friends, and this is the situation he finds himself in, and I don't know where this goes, but he encounters some sort of swamp monster, and, you know, stream of consciousness, just brain dump. I think that's the great place to start your story for two reasons. One, because it gets you to kind of like download your spark of inspiration, right? Which is really useful later on when you're feeling bored and tired of your story. You can revisit that document and remember, like, what was it like when I fell in love with this story? And then the second reason is that you can actually pull a lot of the sort of elements that you need to start building your story from that document. So if you said, I know it's about this guy who, you know, grew up in Texas, that's probably your protagonist, right? So that gives you one of your elements. And you can sort of start circling the things that you've written down that you may not have known were important yet, but you can start using those elements to build your story from. So that's where I think everyone should start. If they don't know where to start with a brain dump.
What are the basic elements that I need? And so I kind of just focus on 5 main things, knowing that there are things in between these 5 things that I need to have. I need to have conflict, obviously, which helps to change your protagonist over time. And so I always start with the ending so initially I come up with an idea. Okay, there's an idea for something that I want to write. Great. What do I want to say? What's the theme? So I go there first. If I can, I come up with a log line, and I kind of use that as my North Star. That way I remember, okay, it's always about this moment. That may change over time. Then I go ahead and I do the ending. How do I want this character to end by the ending of this TV show, pilot, or movie? What do I want to have them end? And then I start them the exact opposite in the very beginning. So I have 2 pieces that I need. I know I need an inciting incident, what sets them off on their journey. You know, they get this letter that came out of the blue. They open the door and there's a dead body. You know, something that happens, that's the inciting incident. So that's there. Then I need a midpoint, some kind of twist that happens in the middle. And then I need an all is lost moment. So I have those 5 points. And then from there, I go ahead and I start making beats. So knowing that I need to get to these 5 points, then I begin to create a beat sheet. And the beat sheet is literally just, okay, then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then meet this person, and then this happens. And it's blah, it's everything. There's nothing that's off limits. And a lot of it doesn't get used, but some of it does. And then once I have an idea through the beats, I begin to massage the beats to make sure that it makes sense that based upon these beats or these scenes, this character is changing and they're making decisions and there's conflict and who's creating the conflict. And I start coming up with characters that can help to drive this protagonist one way or the other, to get to these 5 main points. And then after that's done, and then I create an outline. And my outlines are very detailed. What I typically do with my outline is I take my beats that have been approved that I'm going to go with, and then I put them on a Word document, something like that, and I put down location, exterior, interior, location, day, night. Underneath that, in parentheses, I put down the name of the characters that are in the scene, and then I put down a summary of what the scene is about. What does each character want? Sometimes I'll even fill some dialogue. I'll throw in some dialogue in there that will be temporary dialogue that I'll change later on, but just get an idea of what it is. And I do that for all the beats until I'm done with the whole thing. And when I'm done, then I copy this and I paste it into Final Draft. And now I have my outline. And the reason why, I know not everybody uses an outline, but there are going to be times when you are on a paid project, they're going to ask you for an outline. And so it's a good habit to develop the habit of outlining, because sometimes you'll have to, that's part of your deliverable to a network, that you need to have an outline. So once that's done, now it's like 15 to 20 pages. And when I have that, I'm gold. That's why it takes me such a short amount of time to write, because at that point, it's just dialogue. At that point, I know what the characters want. I know who's in the character. I know who's in the scene. I know the location. I know if it's day or night. I've done all the hard work. Now it's just about, let's go have fun. Let's write. How do we get there in the scene? How does Steve, get upset at Harriet? Is she hiding something from him? Are there any? And I just do a first vomit draft. Blah, get everything done. For me, it takes about 2 weeks once everything's outlined, it takes about 2 weeks to finish a feature film, my first draft. Then I put it away for like a day. And I always, at the end of, whenever I finish writing my first draft, I always drink something, a little alcohol, and I will go eat something like, spend some money and go just like celebratory, like, whew, the hard part's done. Then I'll go back after a day and I'll start looking at it, and I'll go back into each of these scenes and I make sure, like, are there nuances in there? Did I write too much? Is there too many words? Can we, because I'm a director, I also look at, ways that I can visually look and tell the story without words. I would much rather do that kind of stuff. And I go back and I do that for every single scene. And that takes me about a week to do. And then after that, I go ahead and give my script to my brother, who has learned through your website, through me teaching him. He's learned, he works in aerospace. We've actually written 2 scripts together over 2020. We did 2 feature films that we wrote together because he's gotten the hang of storytelling. I give it to him. He gives me some notes back. Things that because he's logical. So he gives me this doesn't make sense. How did he get here? Like character-wise, like, why is he so upset? What happened before to get him to this point? So I'll go back and I'll maybe add a few extra scenes or whatever to earn why we are at this point in the character's behavior. Then I'll give it to a friend of mine that's a woman, and she's an actress, but she also writes. And because I like to get a woman's point of view about certain things, especially because a lot of my characters are women. And I want to get somebody else's point of view that's, not a male, in reference to how this person is behaving. And she'll give me the real skinny. Like I told her, like, don't play with me, like, give me the truth. And she'll tell me, like, we would never do this, or this is what would happen. And so I can now go back and I can make that right. And then I'll give it to my management team, and they'll give me notes and they'll tear it apart, and then we'll get that cleaned up. And then after that, that's when I can, take it out and go shopping with it. So that's my process in a nutshell.
I think the first steps when I begin to write is a lot of thinking about it. Like I'm not really good at just sitting down and starting to bang it out. And oftentimes I don't write an outline. It's not like I have to make an outline first and then write the script. So for me, usually it's a couple of ideas that just won't go away. And so if those ideas won't go away, then that means that there's something, hopefully there's something there. And I just let it percolate. And it has a sort of magnetic, if it's a good idea, and these are rare, because it's not like I've never been one of those guys that just is able to spin a good yarn and have a million stories I want to tell. But in the case of Search and Rescue, it was just a couple of ideas started to sort of bind together. And I think some of them were ideas that I had for other movies that didn't go anywhere. Like, in other words, it's now that I think about it, there were several different ideas and characters that I had been developing for other movies that didn't sustain themselves. They were good, but for some reason they didn't belong in whatever movie I was trying to make. And so it all started to kind of combine into this one film. But you know what? That's specific to this particular movie, and every writing process is different. If somebody comes to me and says, I need you to write Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus in 2 weeks, that's a different process. That's when you sit down and, figure out, okay, act one, this should happen, and this should, that's when I do that. So, work for hire, that has to be of a I think that's easier. A simpler genre is easier to do than this. But I really did have to think about it, and I really did have to draw from a lot of things that had been dormant, ideas that had been dormant that all coalesced to form this thing. That's how it started. Then of course I had to sit down and write every day. Like everybody else, you have to write it. You can think about it all day long, but you have to write it. I kept talking about it, and my wife was finally like, you need to write this thing. You just need to do it. And certainly without Valerie's, insisting that I just, get down to it, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I did. I just basically realized that if I got up at, 5 a.m. every day, that I would be in this kind of, a lot of writers talk about this kind of like haze, where you're not really judging, you're not in a critical mind, you're just sort of in a semi-dream state. That if I got up at 5 and wrote for till 9 or something like that, if I wrote for 3 or 4 hours in the morning, that I could bang out, without me judging myself, I would just knock out, 4 pages or 3 or 4 or 5 if it was a good day. And I just did that, over, however long it was, a month. I just every day, just knocked out a little bit. So at least, after, if you do the math, 5 pages a day times 20 days is what, 100 pages? So inside of a month, you can get a draft done. And then you go back and you're like, oh, this doesn't work, and you actually are able to tackle it critically, but at least the hard part of just getting it out was accomplished if I was diligent and got up and just did it. And that's hard, it's like going to the gym or whatever. That takes, anybody will tell you that's, and some days you don't have anything. Sometimes you just sit there, and you're just like, I got one line. But I think, as real writers will tell you, that's like what's necessary. The writer writes. You can't expect to just not do it and then have great stuff pour out. You have to go to the gym, So that's how it happened.
Begin with character, end with character, find the story in between. I don't care what paradigm people have in terms of story structure. How you get there is critical. And so you start with your characters. That's my take. Again, there's not one right way to do this. I'm just saying that this, I think, is a smart way to go about it, because the characters, it's their story. If we're writing a story, we are assuming that in some magical, mystical way, that story universe exists. Those characters exist. And if it's their story, they know it better than we do. And so character development is about getting curious. It's about asking questions. It's about spending time with the characters. And so the typical things that we see, like biographies and questionnaires, those are great. I call those indirect engagement exercises, because you're reflecting on the character, you're thinking about the character, as opposed to direct engagement exercises. So for example, what if I have a character in mind? I'm going to imagine I'm a psychiatrist. This character is my patient. And if they're reticent to talk to me, I can even go one step further. They have been court appointed to appear with me as a psychiatrist, and they have to answer my questions. If they don't, they will stay stuck in this situation until they do. So you just create a situation in which, like I was saying earlier, you just ask questions, you get curious. When that's a lesson I learned when I was an Air Force brat. You just ask people questions, you get them talking. And so you type, you just let it go. You can even do something, it's a little bit spiritual, I suppose you'd say in a way, where you're gonna do either a monologue or a stream of consciousness with the character. It's sort of like a Vulcan mind meld, like Star Trek, where you get a character in your mind and you do some deep breathing, you get yourself, so you're transitioning out of the busy world and you're gonna be here now with this character. And you set a timer for like 15 minutes and you put your fingers on the keyboard or pen on paper and you close your eyes and you just type and you just type. And your mind will go, oh, I gotta get groceries or the cat and whatever. Just let that go. You don't get attached to it. You just keep coming back to this character and you get done with this. And so you've got all these words that you've typed out. Some of them are like dialogue, like a monologue, and some of them are just like stream of consciousness. 80% of it may seem like gobbledygook to you, maybe 90%, but 20% or 10%, there's something really interesting that popped out there. And that's getting in touch with the characters at a subconscious level. And they start to talk to you. I've seen this happen time and time again. I created a prep class 10 years ago that I teach online, 6-week workshop, taking a story from concept to outline. And the first 4 weeks are all character development. The second week is brainstorming. That's all they do is brainstorm. And I've had hundreds of people tell me that was the most eye-opening experience for them, was doing that type of work. Again, the characters exist. We act on that belief. And we reach out to them and get them talking to us. So the character development, those are some great examples for character development. What can happen out of that is if you identify a protagonist in particular, their state of disunity, where they are disconnected from their authentic nature, and that can inform, if you know what the disunity state is, that can inform where the unity state is. And so now they're not going to just jump there. Then you're going to say, okay, so these plot elements and the characters with whom they intersect, they're going to deconstruct their old ways of being because they don't work out here in the new world. But in the process of that, they're going to uncover their need. Their need's going to start to emerge. This is very Jungian. Jung talks about, he says, when an inner situation is not made conscious, and he's talking about like conflict, inner conflict, it happens outside as fate. Now, I don't know if that's real in the real world, but that's the protagonist story. The protagonist starts off in a state of disunity, and what happens in the plot is informed by that. There's a synergy between it. It's not just these random events. It's like these characters that they intersect with and the events that they go through, that's going to provide the basis of their transformation. And so their disunity, that gets deconstructed. Well, now this stuff starts to come out into the light of consciousness, their need. And then they move into reconstruction. Now they're moving into their new mode of being and eventually toward unity. So you can take that raw material that you get with your characters and see how that starts to shape the nature of the plot, the story structure. And it's not just plugging this in, this has to happen on page 25, the break into Act 2. No, you're doing it through a much more organic fashion with your characters and letting them inform you what the structure will be. And the final value of that is that you're writing multi-layered, richly textured characters who actors want to play. So character development to me is like everything. It's absolutely critical.
One of the best creative decisions I've ever made was joining a writing group. I was in a bubble for a very long time, but it's also hard to find a writing group where everyone knows how to give notes and knows how to take notes. And so I was very lucky because what we have is very unique, and the people within that writing group understand that too. And I've gotten jobs out of this writing group. We're all kind of looking out for each other. There's only 8 of us, but I was a type that would just turn in pages and say, okay, this is what and they're like, well, we don't know where the story's going. Can you just outline it for us? And I'm like, no, I don't outline. Just follow this. Give me the notes on the pages. Like, yeah, well, we can't give you notes if we don't know where the story's going. And so then I had to think about how do I do that? And I started writing, learning how to write treatment, and that was great. First practice in terms of just writing a treatment makes it very easy for you to pitch your script. So there's that skill. And then outlining it, when I would get lost, normally when I'm writing a script, right, I'm just going and I get to a point and I don't know where the story is going to go from there. That's normally how I would write. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, but that's how I would do it. And then something would strike me, or I would know, okay, well over here, I know this is going to happen, so let me just start there. So these huge gaps in my scripts, and then I would connect those gaps. Well, now I outline my entire script, my entire story. First, I'll take those from notes. So I'll have a notebook with me everywhere I go. So it doesn't matter where I'm at, an idea will come and I'll write it down. And I'm starting to get into recording, but I'm very old school. So I start just writing down, and a page of notes in my little notebook will be about 10 pages of script. So I'll usually then, on my writing day, will translate that to those 10 pages. But now, that was the old way. Now I will outline everything. So I'll outline the entire story, and I'm able to write my scripts a lot faster because of that. Because I already know where the story is going to go, the dialogue, the characters are fleshed out, and the dialogue comes a lot easier and a lot faster. So I definitely recommend that, but you have to learn how to outline, you have to learn how to write a treatment, you have to learn how to convert your notes to those things. Me, I just started writing scripts, because that's what I understood the script, right? And started writing there, but that was a very stop-start kind of way. I like to. Now it's just like a fluid, like playing a piano. Once the outline's done and I start the screenplay, it's like playing a piano for me.
I personally, I turned out to write very well in short bursts. I thought I should do more, because when I'm writing in a short burst, it's like, holy crap, if I could keep doing this for 8 hours, I'd be a miracle. But I can't. And I would sit there and I would grind. After the burst was running down, I would grind, and not only would that be unproductive and begin to be disheartening, but I would start to undo my good work. Because when you start to grind in a bad way, you start to doubt, you start to feel bad, and you say, well, I must be feeling bad because this work is bad, which is not necessarily the case. It could be that your process is bad. And so what I would do is I would write something really good, and then I would grind until I was unhappy, and then I would say, oh, that sucks. And then I would write something over it and destroy my own good work. And it took me a long time to pay attention to the fact that I do really well in short bursts. And if I stop when I feel myself starting to lose it, and take a break, take a walk, do exercises, whatever, I can then come back and do another short burst. Getting myself to sit down again is rough, but that's the thing I had to teach myself by paying attention to what worked.
I think writing is inherently like the only person you're battling is yourself, really, most of the time. Because, and I think in particular, at least for me, I can only speak to my experience, but I struggle a lot with like self-hatred. Like there's lots of parts of myself that I hate. And I'm only sort of just now getting over a lot of these types of things, but like when it's just you and a blank screen and a cursor flashing, sometimes like all of your insecurities and things just bubble up, and it gets in the way of you getting your creative thoughts onto the page. And I've learned just for me, like when I'm able to give myself permission to write the worst, most terrible pages of all time, then I can do it. And then I know in my back pocket, I know that writing is a process. So I know that like whatever I try on my first attempt is probably not going to be very good. In fact, like, the terrible first draft is like, that's just kind of a law in how I see it. There are other people who I'm sure are brilliant that can pump out a genius first draft. I am not that person. I will never be that person. And so for me, when I'm allowed to give myself grace and allow myself to write terribly, to just write things that don't make sense, to write sentence fragments, to write, and then they fight, I'll come back later and then keep going, you know what I mean? Like when I allow myself that sort of level of freedom, then I can write. And I feel like on paper, I shouldn't be a writer because I'm like, my self-criticism in my brain is pretty fierce and sometimes it's unbearable. But I think that you have to give yourself grace, and you have to, like, again, I don't want to be too new agey, but you got to like kind of love yourself. You know what I mean? You have to be okay with, yep, these are some terrible words, but you know they're words, and that's all that matters right now. In this particular instance, the only thing that matters is like I'm putting words onto the page. They don't have to be the right words, they don't have to be in the right order, but they're words. And for, at least for a first draft, that's the thing that I think when I learned that, sort of like, you know, unlocked in my brain, I'm just like, oh, this draft doesn't count. It doesn't count because I can go back and fix it later. And so writing with a reckless abandon of like, this doesn't have to be good. This is supposed to be bad. Anyone can write a terrible thing, you know what I mean? Terrible just in terms of the mechanics of the words. Like anybody can write something terrible, you know? And like, that's how I find my entry into it. It's like, if I know for a fact that I can write something terrible. If my goal is to sit down and be a genius, I can't hit that every day. But I can hit being really bad every day. And so that's my only metric of success is like, are there words on the page? Yes. My metric of success is not, are they good words? Is this good? That's for later.
I have two answers for if I have a writing routine that I follow. And one is, yes, I have a writing routine. Two is I don't always follow that writing routine. The best work I've ever done was when I followed that routine. But for some reasons, I don't follow it all the time. And it's tough. And sometimes it's because of just what else I have going on in my life. That routine that I really liked and worked for me didn't, it's just no longer sort of an option for what I have going on right now. And other times it's just tough to just sit down at the desk and write, even though I know I already have a plan to do that. It's just tough, you know, you don't want to. And so sometimes I don't. I fail at sitting down and writing. But when I was following it, it was great. And when I do follow it, it's great because it forces me to write. And the routine was basically, I would get up and 2 hours in the morning, I would write. And then that was it for the day. As far as official writing time, I would still pull out a notebook, or if I was really inspired, I might open the computer and write some more. But those 2 hours, I would set the timer and I would write. At the end of that 2 hours, I would stop, no matter where I was, no matter whether I felt like I could keep going for another 2, or I was like, thank God, I barely made those 2 hours. That felt like a slog. But having it be time-based told me that it doesn't matter what I've written, as long as I've shown up and I have written. And so some days those 2 hours would produce, 10 pages. Other days it would produce 1. But I was measuring whether or not I was doing my job by the time I was spending doing it, and not necessarily the page count or the word count. Because I think that so much of what we do is up here, and it doesn't always translate to the pages. And so that 1 page that I wrote over that 2 hours, that might have been really difficult and was a lot of thinking and feeling and kind of moving through what was going on there. And that 1 page is great output for those 2 hours. And those other 10 pages I wrote the day before might not be great. So I shouldn't measure my progress with what was going on the page, but more about the fact that I could sit down, show up, and do the job.
Give me 3 words about the story. It could be just three words. Revenge, another word. So we'll start with those words. Then give me a character. Who do you want in the character? Then I'll go ask, okay, where does this take place? Get the character. What's the character's job? What does that person do? And what does that character want to do? And then develop the world, develop the character, and why do you want to tell that story? And we'll start from there and then go back, and then just even if it's 1 page or 2 page or 3 pages, write something about what this character does in that world, what their job and what they want to do. And then once you have that, then we could flesh it out a little bit more. And then maybe, like you said, start an outline. What do they need? What's their obstacles? And then we add more characters in. But I would probably start with who the main character is and the world they're in.
If we're really going to like the start, I'm watching a movie that I love. Like my aforementioned Matrix revisiting, where I was like, ideas were just fireworks in my brain after that. I have to, all these ideas are populating up there. From there, you have now this energy that's like just glowing inside of you to create. And that's where I start being like, okay, what can I, I'm seeing elements of this that really inspired me. What elements of this can I take to create something that's my own? And then that's where I'll start toying around with a scene. It usually just starts with one scene where I'll see that so crystal clear. It's one of my favorite moments of the creation process. And then to write that scene. I don't always start a script from the very beginning. I'll sometimes start what I see the clearest. So I'll start with that. And then, once you've looked at that scene and you kind of, all right, is the rest of the story starting to fall into place? Do I see what's going to be happening now in this story? And if the answer is yes, keep going. So then I might start from the very beginning. Okay, let's work our way up to this scene and try and get there. So I'll, do the draft. Usually the first draft is, I don't want to call it a mess because I don't think it's a mess, but it's not textbook screenwriting. It's not perfect. The actions aren't purely actions. The actions are a little bit descriptive up there. Like I'm like living in that flowery description on my screen in my first draft of my screenplay. And I just love it. I think Mark Duplass referred to the first draft like that as like the vomit draft. You're just getting the idea out. And that's the perfect analogy for it. You get this idea out, but I don't know. It's a gross analogy, but you get it. So anyways, you do that draft and then that's where, all right, are we going to do this? Are we going to find the elbow grease to like lift this up and like tighten this script? And, usually around this point, Aaron has already been aware of like my passion for this script. Like, is this something you're interested in too? Because hey, he's going to be the one directing. So is he going to be attached as the director? And we'll kind of come together and like start talking about the project together. He'll usually at this point take it, and if he hasn't already, sometimes we're both in the same stage together, but he'll then take it and start really like polishing it up. And he does such a phenomenal job of absolutely tightening a script. Anything that's extra superfluous that I've been like putting in there because, hey, pizzazz, and it needs to be in there, right? It doesn't need to be in there. He takes it out. He can see as the director exactly what it's going to be. And so he takes it out and he'll really tighten it and it becomes this beautiful, well-oiled machine. And I'm so grateful because once he's had his hands on it, if he'll kick it back to me, I'll read things and sometimes I'll be like, oh, no, you didn't see what needed to be here in this scene. Did you not see the emotional travesty that needed? Oh, no, this has to come back. So then that's when we kick it back and forth. And that's the fun, nerve-wracking, probably in Aaron's opinion, nerve-wracking portion of the collaborative script writing process between us. Because I'm a very passionate writer, if you can't tell. But we're always like on the same team. We're always on the same team, rowing in the same direction to finish this script and make it the best possible project.
I email them to myself. So I have all these random emails that half the time don't make sense. Like, second act, all on a plane, giant fight, guy loses his wife, hitman finds out his ex-wife is married to somebody else, things like that. So I have all these weird random things. But then once I really dig in, I have a process to figure out if something can be a script. And usually I figure out the entire first act, beat by beat by beat, like the first 20 pages. This happens, that happens, this happens, like the first 6 or 7 scenes. Then I know what happens in the second act turn, kind of what shifts the movie or the story, and then how it ends. And if I can figure all that out, then I know I pretty much can write a pretty good script. So that's usually what I do first. I don't want to know the whole story beat by beat by beat because I figure some things out along the way that I would have never thought of. Now there's other times I've kind of thought the whole thing out almost, in more, bigger beats and bigger sections, but that's usually what I do is I know the first act, how it ends, what happens in the middle, and then what happens at the end, and that's it.
There are things you're supposed to do as a writer that you should do. You should make an outline, you should make your character breakdowns. There's all these things that you like do, and you make your cards and you plot out your story, your first and second and third. I don't do any of that. I do none of it.
That's the perfect screenwriter.
Yes.
That's one that has the folded sock drawer.
Yes, that's the guy who does it all correctly. I don't do any of that. I like to sit and think about the idea, and then I like to think about the character, who that woman or man is, and what they're like and what their world looks like. And then I just start to think about what the movie might look like in my head. And once I sort of start seeing the movie itself in my head, then I start writing it. I don't know how it's going to end necessarily, unless it's a thriller. If it's a thriller, I need to know how it's going to end so I can know where I got to go, if that makes sense. You know, because you always want to have that ending that people go, oh. So you think of the ending first. Like, what would be a cool, oh. And then, oh, okay, now how do I get there? So I go backward if it's a thriller. If it's not a thriller, if it's just a story about people and life and love or whatever it is, then I don't really think that much about what's going to happen. I just sort of think about the people and where they are and where I want them to be, what the world's like, what they enjoy. There's usually a lot of wine involved because I enjoy some wine. What happens is I end up writing, I think, something that's much more organic and much more, here I am a writer and I can't find a word. What is the word? Organic and what is it? What's the word when something just spontaneous?
Spontaneous. Okay.
Organic. I end up writing something that's more organic and spontaneous because I haven't sort of telegraphed it. And kind of like when you're acting, you know, you always hear, don't play result, you know, because you've read the entire script. So your character is on a journey. So you know what that journey is, but the character doesn't know. So you don't want to play like you know what's coming because you'll telegraph it to the audience. I find the same thing works for me as a writer. By not knowing everything when I'm writing, I'm discovering it as I'm writing. And it makes the writing process exciting for me because I'm like sitting there at the keyboard. I'm like, this is great. You know, people are like, well, what's going to happen next? Like, I don't know. I can't wait to find out either. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a spontaneous thing. And then hopefully the training and the laws of inevitability that I try to keep focused in my head, you know, kick in as I'm writing. And when it's done, it's a really great story. But yeah, I like to look at it as a living, breathing story that's unfolding as if I'm watching it. And that drives me toward the end. Because I feel like if I do all the outline stuff, for me, if I do all the outline stuff, I've already kind of done it already. So now it's like, oh, now I gotta write it all. I already figured it out. So I just like to jump in and start writing.
Somebody was like, I want to write a movie and I don't know anything about it. I'd be like, what do you want to write about? Like, what's your idea? And they probably have the idea. They're not like, well, I don't know what the idea is. They're going to be like, well, actually, I want to write about this guy who wants to do this thing. And I'd be like, okay, start describing it. Just describe it. And then I might say something like, don't describe their thoughts and don't describe their feelings, any character. Don't describe the insides. Just describe what you would see on a movie screen. You know, just like, and you know, exterior house day, man walks across and gets in the car, drives away. You know, do not care about doing anything wrong. Just spill your guts. Just tell us the movie. Write down the whole movie. We'll figure all that other stuff later. You can figure out where things are supposed to be later. You can figure out everything. I mean, you know, there's so many stories about that where they didn't know what they were doing. You know, they wrote Bridesmaids that way. They didn't know why. They bought screenwriting for dummies or something like that, right? So it's like that fresh voice it's like, it breaks my heart thinking about all the people that think they have, because we've created this industry where it's all coded and they got to go take, you got to learn, you have to learn structure, you have to learn this, you've got to learn all these things. You got to know what a screenplay is, man. You got to know what the rules are before you break them. That's all crap to sell books and all sorts of stuff. It doesn't, God, please bring them in that don't know anything about movies, and maybe we'll have better movies. I mean, that's the problem. It's like all this other stuff. It's like, bring in that person. It's just like, as a teacher, I have had people come in with formatting that's just like, they don't know what they don't have access to final draft. I don't know what they're writing. And it's the most authentic slice of life, funny, succinct, observational, genius stuff, and they don't know. And the reason why it exists is because they haven't learned anything about screenwriting yet. And then once you start teaching them, then all of a sudden they don't know what they're doing. Then they lose their emotional connection. They lose that story. 4-year-olds know how to tell a story. They know how to tell a story. Ask a 5-year-old, what happened today at school? Well, we went in, beginning, middle, and end, the inciting incident. You can tape it. You can go, inciting incident. So you guys should, film crew should do. You should interview a friggin' 10-year-old and then put the little flags in and be like, wow, they know all the structure already. So I don't have to go to so-and-so person's course, or I don't have to take Gordy's class or anything. You don't have to spend any money, and keep your voice. That's the most important thing. It's like, don't lose your voice. Don't lose your instincts, your childlike instincts for telling stories.